Hello and welcome back to my channel. MsStoryMystery here. Tonight, I've got 6 chilling stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you love exploring mysteries and the unknown, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories just like these. Now, settle in, turn down the lights, and let's uncover these eerie encounters together. When I was a kid, I went on this school trip to a well-known camp in Georgia. You know the type. Summer vibes, hot and sticky during the day, but when night hit, it got surprisingly chilly. I didn't really have many friends back then, so I was placed in a cabin with a bunch of kids I barely knew. Not exactly the dream start to a spooky story, but trust me, it gets weird. The camp was your typical setup. Canoeing, hiking, s'mores by the fire. It was fun, but nothing out of the ordinary. That was until one particular evening. The teachers announced an optional night hike. Sounds adventurous, right? Well, apparently our cabin was the only group crazy enough to say yes. We set off, flashlights flickering against the trees, the air cool and thick with that earthy campfire smell. About halfway through, one of the teachers casually dropped a bombshell. The path we were walking on? It wasn't just a trail. We were in an old burial ground. Those flat stones scattered across the ground? Yeah, they were headstones. You can imagine how that went over. We were just kids. Most of us had never even stepped foot in a cemetery, let alone walked over graves in the middle of the night. Some of the girls begged to go back, but the teachers said it'd take too long. So forward we marched, hearts pounding. When we finally stumbled back to the cabin, the mood was tense, to say the least. Some of the girls wanted to share bunks. Others begged to leave the lights on. But camp rules were camp rules. The lights went out, and we all climbed into our separate bunks. I was on a top bunk against the far wall, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the eerie vibe hanging in the air. Not 10 minutes after the teachers left, a scream tore through the cabin. I shot up, heart racing, and looked toward the sound. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall, impossibly tall, nearly touching the ceiling. Its eyes glowed with this fiery red-orange color, and it was wearing a hat, a shadowy, wide-brimmed hat. It just stood there in the corner, motionless, like it was watching us. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Around me, the other girls were screaming, crying, clearly seeing the same thing. The teachers rushed in, but by the time they did, the first girl who had screamed was already bolting out the door, completely hysterical. She described the figure to the teachers, and all of us backed her up. We had seen it too. The teachers did a full search of the cabin, every corner, every nook. Nothing. No shadow, no footprints, no sign that anyone or anything had been there. But the girl who ran? She was so terrified that her mom had to pick her up that night. Eventually, the rest of us were herded back into the cabin. This time, the corner where we had seen the figure seemed brighter, almost too bright, as if it was saying, "Nothing to see here." But we knew better. Even now, years later, the memory hasn't faded. The other girls and I still talk about it sometimes, and we all remember the same thing. The towering figure with the glowing eyes and that shadowy hat. what it was, who or what it wanted, we'll never know. But one thing's for sure, there was something in that cabin with us that night. I haven't shared this story before, mostly because I was terrified that no one would believe me. Even now, I'm still not sure how to explain what happened. This all took place about 6 years ago, not long after my family moved into our current home. At the time, we'd only been living there for about 8 or 9 months. It was right around Christmas, during winter break. My parents had gone out to finish some last-minute shopping, leaving me home alone. It was mid-afternoon, around 3 p.m., and I wasn't tired at all. I sat down on my bed for what felt like just a few minutes. But the next thing I knew, hours had passed. When I checked my phone, it was suddenly 8 p.m. I remember staring at the time, trying to make sense of it. I couldn't remember anything about those missing hours. It felt like I had blinked and skipped through time. It was unsettling, but I told myself not to overthink it. I didn't want to let my imagination run wild, especially being home alone. Since it was already late, I figured it would be a good idea to take a quick shower before my parents got back. For context, our bathroom has a bathtub with a sliding glass door, the kind where you can leave one side open to the room. I decided to start the water first and grab my clothes and towel after. I walked to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and glanced at myself in the mirror like I always do before a shower. But when I turned to face the bathtub, I froze. My heart felt like it stopped. Inside the tub, there was something. It looked like a body, but not how a body should look. It was unnatural, wrong. I could only describe it as appearing lifeless and decayed, but with details so surreal it felt impossible. It was as if time itself had forgotten it, leaving it there to rot. The sight was so shocking that I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my mind racing, but my body refusing to respond. Panic hit me all at once, and I stumbled backward, sliding down the bathroom wall until I ended up sitting on the floor. My phone was still in my bedroom, and I didn't know what to do. I remember sitting there, staring at the bathroom tiles, unable to process what I had just seen, and then everything went black. The next thing I remember was my dad shaking me awake. He and my mom had come home to find me still on the bathroom floor. I couldn't speak for several minutes. All I could do was sob uncontrollably and cling to him. I couldn't even begin to explain what had happened or why I had been so terrified. Even now, years later, I still can't explain that night. I don't know if what I saw was something paranormal, a hallucination, or some kind of strange lapse in reality. But what I do know is that I've never experienced anything like it since, and I hope I never do again. A few weeks ago, I was chatting with some friends about past jobs and why we left them. Just swapping stories. That's when a memory hit me out of nowhere, something I hadn't thought about in years. It was one of those moments where you stop and think, did that really happen? It started back when I was delivering pizza. This was early fall, maybe edging into winter, just as the weather in Texas was starting to cool down. It was getting late, sunset kind of late, when I got an order for a farmhouse down a dirt road. No big deal. I delivered to plenty of out-of-the-way places before, so I didn't think much of it. The road to get there was tricky, though. It was an offshoot of a main road that was under construction at the time, and finding the turnoff was harder than I expected. Eventually, I spotted it, an unpaved dirt path winding through a thicket of trees. My little Mazda wasn't exactly built for this kind of terrain, so the drive was rough and bumpy. Still, I was used to these kinds of creepy, isolated roads. Living in rural North Texas does that to you. You stop noticing how eerie the dark can be. The house was at the bottom of a steep hill, and I parked my car at the top, right next to a stop sign. I figured I wouldn't be there long, so I left the engine running and walked down the hill with the pizza. The customer was nice enough, a little quiet but polite. After handing him the food, I turned to head back up the hill. That's when I saw it. At the top of the hill, right next to my car, something or someone was standing behind the stop sign. It was a shadow shaped vaguely like a human, but something about it was off. Its edges were jagged, and its movements didn't feel natural. It just felt wrong. I froze, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then it moved. It ducked behind the stop sign and darted in front of my car. The headlights dimmed slightly as if something had physically passed in front of them. That's when the cold hit me. Not just the chill in the air, but a deep, gut-wrenching sense of dread. I turned and ran, sprinting up the hill as fast as I could. When I reached my car, I flung open the door, jumped inside, and locked it. Before doing anything else, I checked the back seat. Nothing. Still, I didn't waste a second. I floored it, heading back to the main road without looking back. By the time I got back to the pizza place, I was shaking. I hid out in the bathroom for what felt like forever, just trying to process what I'd seen. Even now, I'm not sure what it was. Maybe it was an animal, maybe it was my imagination. But the shape, the way it moved, I'll never forget it. It wasn't fully human. It had no eyes, at least none that I could see. But I knew it was watching me. A few months later, I quit. I told everyone it was because college was getting too busy, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the real reason. I just couldn't keep driving those roads at night. Sometimes I still pass by that dirt road, but no matter what, I'll never go down it again. Not after what I saw. When I was 13, I lived with my dad, stepmom, grandmother, and my little brother. It was a typical evening at home, and I knew exactly where everyone was. My brother, who was just 4 at the time, was asleep in his room. My dad and stepmom were upstairs in their bedroom watching TV. My grandmother was downstairs in her room. That left me alone on the main floor. At some point, I got up to use the bathroom. Since I knew I was the only one on that floor, I left the door mostly open. Not something I'd normally do, but hey, it felt safe enough. I finished up and turned toward the sink to wash my hands. That's when I saw her. Peeking around the door frame was a woman. A younger woman with long, straight black hair, incredibly pale skin, and a plain white gown. She didn't look blurry or shadowy or transparent like how people describe ghostly figures. No, she looked as real as you or me, but completely out of place. Her face was perfectly detailed, every feature as clear as day. Her expression, though, was what struck me the most. It was completely emotionless. No smile, no frown, just this blank, deadpan stare. I could see the top half of her torso too, as she leaned around the door watching me. I froze. My breath caught, and I instinctively took a step back. For a moment, my mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then my eyes flicked away for just a second, no more than a blink, and when I looked back, she was gone. The bathroom was empty. I stood there for what felt like forever, heart pounding, staring at the spot where she had just been. Then I snapped out of it and started looking around. I searched the hallway, the living room, every corner of the main floor. There was nothing. No sign of her or anything unusual. No one in my house had black hair like hers or skin that pale, and no one was near me at the time. To this day, I can still picture her perfectly. The white gown, her pale skin, and that emotionless face. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. I know I saw her. For the first time in my life, I found myself in the grip of a deep and intense depression. It was suffocating. And for those of you who live with this every day, my heart goes out to you. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. This depression didn't creep up on me. It hit me like a freight train. One day I was fine, and the next I was completely wrecked. For the better part of a year, I was just stuck. To try and climb out of it, I forced myself to take walks in the woods near my house. I'd always loved those woods. They used to be my escape, my happy place. But during that time, instead of helping, they seemed to pull me even deeper into the darkness. One evening, I set out on one of my so-called therapy walks. It was just before dusk, and as the sun began to set, I didn't bother heading home like I usually would. Normally, I'd make sure I was back before the woods turned pitch black, but that night, I didn't care. Instead of walking toward the fading light, I found myself wandering deeper into the darkness. There's this spot in the woods, a tunnel of shrubs and branches that forms a sort of natural archway. It's in the darkest part of the forest, and I always avoided it. It gave me the creeps, even in broad daylight. But that evening, I felt drawn to it. Standing at the mouth of the tunnel, I felt this wave of stillness. You know that feeling, like the world around you has paused? The air grew heavy, and the silence pressed down on me. But instead of dread, I felt relief. I wasn't afraid. In fact, I felt comforted, like I wasn't alone, like something was there with me. It was almost pitch black and everything was eerily still. Normally, that kind of vibe would have sent me running, but that night, I didn't feel like running. It felt inevitable. So, I stepped into the tunnel. Walking through, I stumbled and tripped over roots and branches. I couldn't see a thing, but I kept going, pulled forward by something I can't quite explain. Eventually, the trees began to thin out, and the darkness lifted just enough for me to see a few feet ahead. And then, all at once, the calm disappeared. It was like waking up from a dream and realizing where you are. The comfort, the heaviness, the pull, it was gone. And in its place was this sharp, gut-wrenching fear. I was alone in the woods at night, with nothing but my pounding heartbeat and a chill running down my spine. I turned and bolted. I ran all the way home, my ears filled with the sound of my own footsteps and my mind racing. To this day, I don't know what I experienced in those woods. Maybe it was my mind, desperate and lost, finding some kind of metaphorical comfort in the literal darkness. Or maybe there was something there with me that night. I'll never know for sure. But after that walk, something changed. I didn't feel hopeful, not yet, but I started to feel something. Fear, of all things. And as strange as it sounds, it felt good. It was like a spark, reminding me that I was still here. Over the next few months, I kept walking in those woods, even at night. The fear grew stronger each time, and eventually I couldn't stomach it anymore. I avoided the tunnel after that. When I walked past it, that eerie stillness was gone, replaced with the usual dread that made me want to stay far, far away. And that's when I knew I was getting better. The woods no longer felt like an invitation. They felt like something to leave behind. 2 years ago, a massive storm swept through my region, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The forests here took a hard hit. Decades-old trees were ripped from the ground, toppled like dominoes. It was heartbreaking to see such a dramatic change in the landscape, but those fallen trees quickly became something else, a sort of natural playground. People would climb on them, sit for a while, and reconnect with nature. I was one of those people. Working from home, I'd often spend my lunch breaks walking through the woods or sitting quietly in nature. It always felt like a little escape, a mini vacation for my mind in the middle of a busy day. One evening, I found myself drawn to one of the larger fallen trees. It had been there for a while, its massive trunk resting comfortably on the forest floor. I climbed up, found a spot to sit, and watched the sunset. The colors streaked across the sky, and for a moment, everything was peaceful. Just me, the woods, and the quiet hum of nature. And then I heard it. A high-pitched shriek cut through the stillness. It didn't sound human, but it didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard before either. It was sharp, distorted, and completely unnatural. The second the sound hit me, so did a wave of dread. I can't explain why, but it felt like every instinct in my body was screaming, "Get out!" I jumped down from the tree and started walking away. I didn't run, but I didn't dare look back either. I just kept my eyes forward, moving as quickly and firmly as I could until I was out of the woods. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling, so I started Googling. I searched every keyword I could think of, trying to find an explanation. The closest thing I found was that foxes can scream in a way that sounds eerily like a distorted human scream. I tried to convince myself that's what it was, a fox, nothing more. But that feeling of dread, it didn't make sense. It was too intense, too immediate, like some kind of warning. I avoided the woods for a week after that. When I finally went back, things were different. The fallen trees had been cleared away, though there were still broken branches and debris scattered around. I've walked through that forest plenty of times since then, and nothing like that has ever happened again. But I still wonder, what was it about that day? What was it that I heard? And why did it feel like something or someone was trying to send me a message? Thanks for tuning in to Miss Story Mystery. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more eerie tales and mysteries. And hey, if you know someone who loves a good scare, share this video with them. They might just thank you later. Have you had a strange or unexplained encounter of your own? I'd love to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments or send it my way. You never know, it might just make it into a future video. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.